Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Elise, and this is 10 to Life, where we talk everything true crime. We also talk about all of the red flags along the way. So I have my new little red flag that I'm going to wave every time we come across a red flag in these cases. So if you're brand new, stopping by for the first time, and you enjoy today's case video and hearing what I have to say, I hope you consider subscribing to the channel. And for those of you who are not new and have stopped by and you're a regular 10 to Lifer, welcome back. Thanks so much for your support, guys, and I'm happy to have you here today. So you may have caught a video that I recently did regarding the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie case and the new lawsuit that has come into play. So I'm going to do a little bit deeper of a dive on this video today because there is a lot of information in that lawsuit. Now, when you align it with some of the timestamps and events that we already know took place, it very strongly leads me to believe that there is an immunity deal in place here. So I did a quick video on it and I uploaded it just recently, but it was only a quick 10-minute snapshot. So today I'm going to be talking more in depth about why I think that the Laundries may have an immunity deal in place and really what that means for the civil suit. So let's jump right in.
10 to Life with Elise starts right now.
As most of you know by now, the Petito family filed a civil lawsuit against the Laundries for $100,000. In the suit, they allege that the Laundries knew that Gabby was dead and that Brian had murdered her. Gabby's parents also allege that they tried to help Brian get out of the country. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of that civil lawsuit, let's talk about what that civil suit means really quick. Because in more times than not, when you file a civil suit and you include such specific allegations and claims, you have to have evidence to back up those claims. You can't just file a lawsuit with a bunch of speculation. So there has to be evidence in order to file this lawsuit, not to mention the enormous waste of money that it would be to file this suit and take it to court if you didn't have sufficient evidence. The Petitos are also asking for a jury in this suit, which means that they are confident that they do have enough evidence and strong enough evidence to bring forward that they will result in a win. This means that the Petito family and their lawyer have sufficient evidence to prove that Brian's parents not only knew about the murder, but that they tried to help Brian get out of the country. Now, if they have this evidence, it is very safe to assume that the police have it as well. Which then raises the question, if the police have evidence that the Laundries knew about the crime and tried to help Brian flee, why haven't the Laundries been criminally charged? Unless they can't be charged. Now, to clarify, because I've seen a lot of comments floating around regarding them being charged with accessory after the fact. In Florida, they legally cannot be charged with accessory after the fact if they are related to the person who committed that crime, which in this case we know they are. They could, however, be charged with obstruction, which is any action that prevents law enforcement from learning about a crime or those involved in a crime. Now, initially, they didn't have a duty to openly speak or cooperate even with the police, but if they did know Brian's whereabouts or that he did kill Gabby, which it's outlined that they did know that, they could be charged with obstruction. And although they are able to wiggle out of the accessory charge based on Florida statute, there is a possibility that they could always be charged federally. Although I do think that's unlikely, it is a possibility. So again, just taking that whole thing off the table, if the police have evidence, as the Petitos do, that the Laundries knew about the crime and tried to help Brian flee, why haven't they been charged criminally? Unless, of course, they can't be charged due to an immunity agreement. In the lawsuit, it's alleged that Gabby was killed on August 27th by Brian and that there were multiple calls made between Brian, his parents, and their lawyer between August 27th and August 30th. These phone calls were taking place, literally, as Brian was driving Gabby's van across the country back home to Florida without Gabby. Then he returns home on September 1st with the van and without Gabby, and the following day, on September 2nd, Brian's parents pay their attorney a retainer fee. And a retainer fee is really just a lump sum that you pay a lawyer or whoever you're hiring for a said task. And then all the expenses and hours worked are drawn against that retainer until the balance becomes so low that it requires you to essentially refill it. It's a way for lawyers to basically guarantee that they're going to be paid and they're not going to be stiffed for their work later down the line. It's very, very common to have to pay retainers. So you guys all know that I love my timelines. For me, it's an easy way to keep track of dates without your head spinning, and we know in this case there are so many dates. So I created a timeline that I want to walk you guys through with key dates that we now know through the lawsuit and some of the dates that we already had known. Once we walk through this timeline, I'll explain more about the immunity deal and what that may mean, especially for this civil suit, because there is a laundry list of reasons. Here we see the dates when Brian left Utah and returned. Nothing major really that we need to discuss, but I wanted to include it in there in the overall timeline. As we continue, we see the last phone call that Gabby made to her dad. Then her last social media post, which was on August 25th, where she posed with that pumpkin. And this is where the timeline starts to become very important. And August 27th is a very big day. A lot happened on August 27th. So, on August 27th, Gabby and Brian reportedly have that infamous argument at Mary Piglet's, the restaurant, the Tex-Mex restaurant, or whatever it's called. This is also the day that the Petitos are saying Brian killed Gabby. In addition to that argument and the murder happening on this day, this is also the same day that that text message is sent from Gabby's phone to her mom that her mother suspects Brian sent. That text read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." And Stan, as many of you know, is her grandfather. But Gabby never called him by Stan, which is what raised the initial red flag for her mother. In addition to those three things happening on this day, later, that same day, August 27th, is also when Gabby's van was spotted on the side of the road in Wyoming, and what ultimately was the tip that led investigators to finding her remains. In the lawsuit, it alleges that there is proof that for the day after Brian killed Gabby, and for the next couple of days after that, multiple phone calls were made between Brian, his parents, and the lawyer. And allegedly, during these days and during these phone calls, Brian told his family what he had done, and they sought out legal help as he began his drive across the country back to Florida. Then on August 30th, he sends the "no service in Yosemite" text from Gabby's phone. Now, this text in detail is very important, because if he in fact did have legal counsel at this point, which allegedly he does, wouldn't the lawyer be advising him to stop all communication, not advising him to send fake texts to throw Gabby's parents off? Unless, of course, this is something that Brian did on his own accord, without telling his parents or without telling his lawyer until much later. Because I'm thinking that maybe all of the phone calls and incoming texts from Gabby's family, wondering if she was okay, wanting to hear from her, were possibly getting to him. And then without thinking, he wanted to quickly alleviate the pressure and then just sent off that message. Because I highly doubt that a lawyer would advise anybody not only to send the message, but to have any communication at all. I think it would be the complete opposite, saying, okay, from this point on, you don't text anybody, you don't call anybody, you don't do anything. So that text message confuses me quite a bit, because we know that it falls within the timeline in which he already was having active conversations with his attorney. So then Brian ends up returning home on September 1st, and the following day, his parents pay their attorney that retainer fee. They also adjust their camping reservation, and the family goes camping together from September 6th to September 8th at Fort DeSoto Park, I believe it was. So they're all camping, having this family gathering, all while ignoring Gabby's parents' phone calls, text messages, and blocking them on social media. 10 days after their son had killed Gabby, and they knew that Gabby wasn't no longer alive and with them, and just ghosting her family while they are on a family camping trip. So Gabby's officially reported as missing on the 11th, and the Laundries still aren't speaking or sharing what they know. They put a couple little statements out through their lawyer, but essentially it is completely silent from them. And instead of sharing what they know, Brian leaves for Carlton Reserve around the 13th or 14th, which was always a huge, also red flag, because nobody seemed to be able to get the date right on that, So he goes to the Carlton Reserve around the 13th or 14th, and then that manhunt ensues. So this is also when I suspect that Brian's parents were trying to give Brian a head start. Because as we know, there was a ton of conflicting information about when he was actually last seen and when he left for that solo camping trip to the reserve. And then way in the future, it comes out that, oh no, we really think he actually probably left 2 days earlier on the 13th, not the 15th when we said. And then the police who said, well, we were watching him, we had eyes on him, and everything fell apart. The whole thing was just, wave them all over the place, guys. So then just a few days later, Gabby's remains were found. Now, something here that is very interesting is that there was an active manhunt for Brian and a federal indictment that was issued for him on September 23rd for all of those credit card charges and the credit card fraud. Yet his family still didn't share what they knew about August 27th or Gabby as this, national manhunt was underway. So the search for Brian continues for nearly 45 days. Police, rangers, FBI, and many other trained professionals on boats and scuba gear, everything, searched for Brian for weeks with zero results. But then, on October 20th, when Brian's parents joined the police to search for the very first time, they find Brian's remains in 20 minutes. 20 minutes after trained professionals for weeks couldn't find him. These two lay people, who happen to also be Brian's parents, happened to strike gold and find his remains and his belongings on their very first search with police after 20 minutes. Fat chance, in my opinion. Fat chance. And I'm just going to throw this up right now, guys, because it seems much more likely that the police were led to Brian's remains by his parents rather than them stumbling across them by a happy accident. So at that point, Gabby's remains are found, Brian's remains are found. Essentially, the active search and question of what happened to Gabby, all questions have been answered, but everybody still is, of course, wondering as far as what was in the notebook. Was there ever confession? Because at this point, he wasn't charged with her murder. And the next big timeline milestone we get to is December 15th, because on December 15th, the Laundries filed a petition in court to get $20,000 from Brian's bank account. Now, how he got the $20,000 is unclear, but I do think it's safe to say that it isn't from his salary at Publix. And I also think it's safe to say that if he had 20 grand just parked in his account, he wouldn't have needed to use Gabby's credit cards. He wouldn't have needed to fly all the way home from Utah to clean out a storage unit to avoid a 1-month fee. Nothing in this whole statement as far as the $20,000 and him going home to close out the storage, none of that ever added up. I don't think it ever added up for anybody. So this is why it's my belief that he didn't get that infusion of money in his account until after he returned home to Florida. And we'll get into that in just a minute here. So here's where we get into the immunity deal. There's evidence that Brian's parents knew Gabby was no longer alive and that Brian killed her. We know that now because of the civil suit and the fact that you're unable to file a civil suit without having proof to back up your claims. Also with the call logs of the group calls with the attorney the day after Gabby was killed. I think it's safe to say that they definitely knew and were trying to take actions to protect their son. Why else, while their son's on a road trip, would they be having group calls with an attorney as he's driving back from Wyoming to Florida without Gabby and she was killed the day before? I mean, hello, the writing is on the wall here. So we know the parents knew. Next up, we know that there's evidence of some sort that they tried to help Brian leave the country. Now, we don't know yet exactly what that evidence is. We haven't learned that yet. We will in the civil trial, but we don't know what it is yet, but we do know that it exists. Based on the timeline and the information that we do have, I believe his family was trying to give him a head start of sorts when they gave out all of those bogus Carlton Reserve dates and not knowing when he left, where he truly was. I also think that there's a possibility that they gave him that $20,000 and that was in an effort to help him on his journey out of the country. Now, if that's the same evidence the Petito family has, we'll just have to wait and see. But we do know that they have proof of the parents trying to help him go out of the country. Then we know that the search for Brian went on for nearly 45 days with extremely trained professionals, but yielded no results until, poof, 20 minutes after his parents helped, then they had everything. So it's my belief that following that family camping trip, when Brian kind of escaped undetected to Carlton Reserve, it's my belief that the attorney, Bertolino, was working out an immunity agreement for Brian's parents to share not only what they knew about Gabby, but also Brian's location as everything progressed as he went into the reserve. And as soon as that agreement was penned, I believe is when they led police to Brian's remains, his notebook that had the confession, and to all of it. Because why be so reluctant to help or speak for nearly 2 months in total, and then all of a sudden you agree to help, and not only help, but successfully lead police to what they have been searching for weeks? There is proof that they knew that Brian killed Gabby. There is proof that they tried to help Brian leave the country when there was a federal indictment issued for him, but yet they were not charged or even formally questioned once. Why is that? Unless they had immunity. We also know that in the interview that Brian's sister Cassie did with Good Morning America, she said that she had spoken with police, but not Brian, saying that she wished she could talk to him, implying that he wasn't speaking to her. Then in another interview, she says that she wishes Brian would have come to her initially when he got home to Florida, and that she and her parents are no longer on speaking terms either. So my question with that is, there was obviously no bad blood between Cassie, Brian, or the parents after Brian returned home initially. In fact, they all went on that family camping trip together and spent some time together in Fort DeSoto. So what changed so quickly to where then nobody was talking to Cassie after September 6th at Fort DeSoto Park? Could Brian and his parents have cut Cassie out as to not implicate her? If Brian's parents were working out an immunity deal, but Cassie didn't have one, could they have all been trying to help her, essentially, avoid obstruction charges had she known the truth? It's just something that I can't seem to shake, because they seem to have a good relationship with her, and she saw Brian at Fort DeSoto Park, and then all of a sudden everybody cut her off, and she was trying to ask questions and asking in interviews, I wish you would just come forward and confess. I wish you would get our family out of this mess. I wish that we knew what happened. I loved Gabby. My children loved Gabby. Had she known the truth, I first of all think she would have come forward. But I think that maybe the parents cutting her off and Brian cutting her off was maybe in an effort to not tell her the truth, not only so that she wouldn't share it, but also maybe to avoid her being charged down the road. Because even though, again, she couldn't be charged with accessory after the fact because she's a relative as well, there still is the opportunity for federal charges down the line or even state obstruction charges. So now that brings us to the civil suit. The civil suit was filed for $100,000, a very small amount considering how high profile of a case this is and the allegations outlined within the suit. And I stated early on that when I first heard of this suit, it was my belief that it has absolutely nothing to do with money. I think that if it were a money grab, or even remotely related to money, that it would have been for a much larger sum. To me, the civil suit is about principle. It's about calling the Laundries out for what they did and who they are, and making their actions public knowledge, even if they can't criminally be held accountable for those actions. Not only publicly naming them for who they are, what they did, and what they've done, but if criminal charges are now at this point not an option, a civil suit really is the only option left to make them hold any sort of responsibility for their role in this entire thing. Because think about it, any evidence and proof that the Petito family has about the Laundries, knowing and helping Brian flee, the police have that exact same proof and evidence. And there is no way that the Petitos and their lawyer would be made privy to evidence that the police does not already have. And if the police has it and hasn't filed charges yet, you have to ask yourself why. And don't forget, the Petitos are asking for a jury trial, which means they are very confident in the evidence they have to support these allegations. So if the Laundries did receive immunity, as I suspect they did given the circumstances and everything we know, what will happen in the civil trial? If they did receive immunity, they will most likely be forced to testify during the civil suit. Because when you sign an immunity agreement, you no longer can be held accountable criminally, and because of that, you are often required to testify, since there is absolutely no possibility of self-incrimination at that point. You aren't given the privilege of invoking your Fifth Amendment right when there's any sort of immunity deal in place, because at that point, there's no repercussions from you speaking. And so a lot of the time it's actually required in these deals that you do testify openly, should you ever need to or be subpoenaed to. However, if the Laundries did not receive immunity, I do believe that they will invoke their Fifth Amendment right during the civil suit and not testify, as a means to not self-incriminate, because if they do self-incriminate, then they can be criminally charged. But again, think about it. Even if they don't speak and they don't testify and they invoke their Fifth Amendment right, they can still be criminally charged based on the sufficient evidence that the Petitos have. According to the Petitos, they think it is so strongly, and their lawyer thinks it is so strong, that they will still be criminally charged whether they testify or not. So if that evidence is so strong to where criminal charges will happen regardless, immunity deal off the table, guys. If that evidence that they have is so strong that it would result in criminal charges if there were no deal in place, that's again the same evidence that the police have, leading me to believe that they would have already filed the criminal charges, but they're not, which just takes us right back to where we were in the beginning about them having a deal in place and that that's the reason they haven't been charged. And I also think that that immunity deal that they may have is also one of the reasons behind this civil suit, to still publicly name them for what they did and make sure that the public knows and that it's out there. Because even if they can't have criminal repercussions, at least they can have public repercussions and a civil suit to where everybody knows, and they essentially can't, yes, they can get away with it lawfully, but they can't get away from it actually in the public, and it's naming them for who they are and what they did. Because we absolutely know that this civil suit is not about money. It's about something else entirely. So let me know what you guys think. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Do you also believe that there is an immunity deal in place? Because either way, guys, when this gets in the courtroom, assuming that it doesn't get dismissed, which I know a lot of people are thinking it will, I don't think it will. I think the Petitos are like a dog with a bone and they are going to fight this. But we're going to learn one way or another once this gets in the courtroom, because the Laundries are either going to testify or they're not, which is going to show right away, is there any sort of deal in place or not. If they do testify, we're going to not only learn more about what happened, what they knew, we're going to see more discovery is my guess, and we're going to get a lot of the answers that we've wanted all this time. But unfortunately, they most likely will not, again, have any sort of criminal charges attached to that because they are testifying since they have immunity. But if they don't testify, it's because there could possibly be criminal charges coming down the pike. Again, not the accessory after the fact, but they definitely can be charged with obstruction. So either way, we're going to get answers. And you know what? It's very possible too that one of the purposes of this civil suit, in addition to just naming them publicly, could be to get the discovery and to get answers and to get more information. And again, I don't believe it has anything to do with money. If it were about money, I think that amount would be way, way higher. I think it's about something much deeper. And we also know that the Petito family, they have a lot of integrity. They are good people. I don't know them personally, obviously, as do, I mean, none of us really do, I guess. But from what we've seen and what we've gathered, I don't believe that they are the kind of family to just try to have some sort of money grab. I think they're trying to do right by Gabby. They're trying to hold the people accountable. They're trying to get answers. And that's what I think this whole civil suit is about. And it's going to be very interesting to know what the Laundries' role really was in all of this. Because we all now know it did go much deeper. They knew about Gabby's murder. They still went out on this family camping trip with Brian, which I still, and I've said it in all of my videos, I believe it was the last hurrah, so to speak, the last time the whole family could get together. I also think it probably was maybe a little bit of strategizing at that point too, because they're off the grid. They can have these open conversations. But we also now know that there is proof out there that they tried to help Brian get out of the country. So was it that $20,000 that then once they found his remains, it was time to get that back? Was the Carlton Reserve them trying to give him a head start? And because I don't think that the end game was for him to unalive himself in the reserve. I really don't. I think that he was going to try to slowly escape and get off the grid, maybe work his way south. I don't even know. But I don't think that that was the end game. Had it been, I think that it would have come to a conclusion much faster than it did, regardless of that area being underwater and all of that. I just think that I think he was trying to buy time and possibly escape, and I think that his parents, it's my opinion, that they were trying to give him a head start, and that's why none of those dates ever added up as far as when they last saw him, when he went on this solo trip to the reserve, when the police last saw him. I mean, it was just a huge walking red flag from the very beginning. So let me know what you guys think. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Leave them in the comments below. I am literally following this case like glue, because I want to know every single detail that comes out against these dirty laundries. So if you want to hang out with me as we take out the dirty laundry and scrub it with bleach, hit subscribe and you'll get notified when I post updates regarding this case and, of course, other cases as well. Thanks again for tuning in with me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the coverage. Don't forget to leave your comments below, subscribe if you haven't, turn that notification bell to on, and please give this video a thumbs up on your way out. And we will talk again very, very soon. Until the next case, stay safe. Bye.